Sometime later God tested Abraham. He said to Abraham, "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him. There is a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But then the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son."
One of the more difficult, maybe one of the most difficult passages that we have in the Bible. Definitely one of the toughest ones that I have for myself. I never have liked that story. Sometimes I like to think maybe it is just a story that was passed down to talk about how Abraham was faithful to God no matter what God asked him to do. Because if I think about it, if it is a story, I think about what poor Isaac was thinking. It would almost constitute child abuse, tying your kid up as an offering, and as the story tells us, basically raising your knife to kill him, and at the last moment God swoops in to save the kid. Yeah, we get a happy ending to the story, but what is Isaac thinking this entire time? Is he always kind of watching his dad as he grows up, wondering, is something like this going to happen again? I don't know. But it's a tough story to deal with. But it isn't necessarily a story that we should just ignore, because it is that tough story. Before we get into it a little bit longer, we're kind of moving along through the book of Genesis here, and there's a couple other important events just to touch on briefly before we talk a little bit more about the story of Abraham and Isaac. We're getting on to the story now of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. God tells Abraham that he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham has the courage and the strength to tell God, "You know what? Maybe you shouldn't do it. Let's find 50 innocent people in the city. And if you can find the 50 innocent people, let's not destroy it." God says, "Okay." God can't find 50 innocent people, and Abraham negotiates him down all the way to 10 innocent people. And God still can't find 10 innocent people to save the city. Eventually the city is destroyed, and only 4 people are saved. It's Lot's wife and his 2 daughters. Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters, which is Abraham's brother. But I bring up that destruction of the story about Abraham, or Sodom and Gomorrah, because in that story, 2 angels come to rescue Lot from the destruction. And when the angels enter the house, and then in the story, all the men of the village surround the house and they demand that Abraham or that Lot send the two visitors out so they can rape them. Lot says, don't do this, don't do this. Here's my two daughters instead. Again, a terrible story in the Bible. A terrible story. One, why Lot would offer his two daughters instead of the two people sent by God. Maybe he knew that was better than having those angels that were sent. But more is the story is often used as a way to say, you see, God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because the men wanted to rape the two visitors that were there. And people have used this story as proof that God disapproves of homosexuality. Now, I don't have the time or the desire to get into all the verses in the Bible about that people talk about with God and homosexuality. But let's say it's safe to say with this one with Sodom and Gomorrah, there's a lot more going on there than just the condemnation of those actions. There's a lot more to that story than God simply saying, this is why I'm destroying the city, because of the actions of those men of the city. I think that's an important thing to know about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not as simple as just God saying, look, what those men wanted to do to those other men. That's why I'm destroying the city. It's not that simple of a story. Like, there's a bunch of stuff that we get into, and if you want to talk about that, I'd be happy to talk about it, but too much to put into one sermon. But it's an important thing to point out as we're journeying through Genesis. After this, we get to the story of Isaac being born finally, and then he's being weaned, and Ishmael is picking on Isaac, and Sarah, who's Isaac's mom, doesn't like seeing that. So she basically tells Abraham, we've got to get rid of Hagar and Ishmael, because I can't stand the way that he is treating my son. Abraham consults God, and God says, that's fine. You can let him go. I'll watch over and protect them. It's another great example in the Bible of God loving and caring for people who others have discarded and thrown away. It's kind of callous and mean, though, on Sarah and Abraham's part, because in that time, if you were to kick an unmarried woman and a child out of your family, you basically were condemning them to death, because they had no way to make a living for themselves. They wouldn't have had any kind of way to make a life. And of course, we don't hear the whole story, and we also know that God promised Abraham that he would protect Hagar and Ishmael. And we get a story when Hagar and Ishmael are about at their wits' end, that the angel comes and saves them, reminds them that God will be with you too. It's just a reminder of the mess that Sarah and Abraham made when they decided not to wait for God's promise of an heir. They decided to have a baby through the servant Hagar. And all the trouble that caused because they weren't waiting for God's timing. It's just the further consequences of that. But it's also a nice reminder of God not throwing those Hagar and Ishmael away too. Even though God's promise is going to go through Isaac, God doesn't forget about Ishmael and Hagar and promises to take care of them, even though they seem to be two people that are kind of on the margins of society. That's a good reminder for us too, that God takes care of those that we quickly and easily discard. That God still loves them too. And even though Abraham and Sarah seem callous and mean for throwing them out, that's also a good reminder to us, that meaning that they weren't perfect, Abraham and Sarah, and that God doesn't need perfect people to carry out God's plan. What he needs is people willing to work and to try. So a couple little neat reminders in that story. But then we get to this terrible story, in my opinion, of Abraham and the supposed or the almost sacrificing of his son Isaac. There's an old joke that Abraham was fussing with his new computer when Isaac wandered past. "What you doing, Pop?" Isaac asked. "I'm trying to load Windows 8 on my old laptop," Abraham said. "It'll never work," Isaac replied. "You don't have enough memory on that thing." "Well, don't worry, my son," Abraham said. "God will provide the RAM." The RAM, the memory for the computer, the RAM for the sacrifice. Sorry. But I think there's lots of jokes about that story because we don't laugh at it. It almost makes us want to cry. It's a story, yes, about God testing Abraham, I suppose. And some people explain it by saying this is proof that Abraham had truly matured in his faith, that no matter what God asked of him, he was going to go and do it. But what kind of a God makes a demand like that? What kind of a father would even consider doing such a thing? But yet, as the story goes, we don't even see Abraham blinking or even hesitating from what we get in the Bible. And of course we know there's a happy ending when God does prepare or does provide a ram for the sacrifice. So what do you suppose, or what do I think is going on in this story? Well, some people explain it as, it's true, this happened exactly as it's written. And if God wants Abraham to sacrifice his son, then who are we to question God and what God wants? God must have had a good reason for asking this. I suppose that's true. Could be true. But I don't buy it. It's not really honest. For questioning God is something that happens throughout the Bible. For people of great faith do it quite often. Job questioned God throughout the whole episode when he was being tried and losing all of his health and his wealth and his family. Jesus questioned God in the Garden of Gethsemane. Or on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? In the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, you know, God, if it was my idea, let's not do this. You know, I don't want to go through this. Of course, he ends his prayer with, not my will, but your will. But he certainly was questioning if this was something that really needed to happen. Abraham bargained with God just a couple chapters ago over the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So questioning God and questioning if this is truly God's plan is not a sign of weakness. It can be a sign of strength. If God seems to be asking us to do something that would be contrary to God's teaching, then it is our duty to question and to pray in order to see, why are we doing this? Why are you asking me to do this? Is this really what you want me to do? Another way to look at it is maybe it's a story about human commitment. Maybe it reminds us of that sometimes doing the right thing is a hard thing. Naturally, doing this right thing, obeying God, goes to an extreme. But many times, Jesus using stories or God using stories goes to the extreme too to get our attention. Sometimes being committed to God means doing the right thing, no matter the sacrifice involved. Standing up for justice for all people, no matter if it is an unpopular stance. Sometimes we're scared to stand up because we're afraid of losing a job, maybe being rejected by friends or being laughed at, or all myriad of excuses for why we shouldn't stand up for someone or some group of people. Maybe this is a story reminding us that if it is truly justice, then no matter what the sacrifice is, we should stand up. Maybe on a historical note, child sacrifice was practiced in those ancient times. We don't have a lot of information on it, but it seems that Israel's neighbors would practice child sacrifice to gain favor with the gods they believed in. There's a law repeated many times in the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament forbidding the practice of child sacrifice. You don't make a law against something if it is something that's happening. So some people suggest that maybe this is a story that this was God's rejection of Isaac's sacrifice, and another way of showing the people of Israel that God doesn't want child sacrifice, or isn't what they should be doing. One thing that is true about this story is that it's an incident that foreshadows God's sacrifice of his only son, Jesus. As I was doing some reading and commentaries about this passage, one person went and set aside all the parallels between the sacrifice of Isaac and the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And there are lots of parallels. There's the third day. Abraham and Isaac waited 3 days. Jesus was risen on the third day. The wood with Isaac and the burnt offering, and the cross being the wood that Jesus carried. Isaac was asked to carry the wood up the hill. There's all kinds of foreshadowing. But of course, God went through the sacrifice of his son. They didn't require of Abraham. So it's an incident, it's a story that reminds us that God truly did sacrifice a lot and everything for us. Reminds us that God has given up more, has given up a lot for us. So while there may not be any easy answer as to why or what this story is or the real reason behind the story, there are some things that we can learn from it. Sometimes it's tough to do the right thing when asked to do it. Maybe God's asking us to look at what we need to sacrifice in our life to become closer to God. It serves to remind us of the sacrifice that God is going to make later on in the trial and in the crucifying of His Son. So even though it might be a real difficult story, even though we may not understand truly what was going on or what God had in mind, or even if you're like me and you feel real sorry for little Isaac laying on that altar, it is a story that can teach us some things. And maybe most powerfully, it can teach us, or it can ask us that question: what do I need to sacrifice in my own life in order to become closer to God? What do I need to give up in my life in order to build and strengthen that relationship that I have with God? Amen.